Hello, everybody, and welcome to the March edition, the pre-Vanessa Grant birthday edition of the Salesforce Business Analyst virtual Trailhead Community Group, and our fabulous session today, BA in the CoE. Logo courtesy of Shirtforce. I don't say that enough. Thank you, Shirtforce, for letting us use your badass logo for our badass BA. First, some housekeeping items. The meeting will be recorded, edited, and posted on YouTube. So if you have to step away for a sec, that's cool. It'll be up, but you will be stuck waiting for me to put it up. But please go check out our channel. Feel free to subscribe. We have some good content on there. I know I've actually had to go back there a couple times where I'm like, I'm about to start a discovery, and I haven't been doing delivery for the last year. Let me go refresh myself. Chat, and we will do our best to keep up, but don't spam the chat. You know, if you made a joke and it just didn't land, like it just didn't land, dude, just move on is all I've got to say. You know, I do that too. It happens. Raise your hand if you want to speak. But I will say we generally will wait until the end of our speaker session to start a Q&A. I'm going to hit the Q&A right now. So if you throw a question in the chat, I cannot promise you that we will always remember it. If you can throw your questions into the Q&A, that is the best place to get your questions answered, generally after the speaker is done speaking. Also, you can keep an eye for pinned posts at the top. We try to share all the best chats or jokes will be pinned to the top. Generally, like links and things like that are what we will end up putting there. Our agenda. And thanks. Also, another thing I don't do enough is thank my wonderful virtual assistant, Hyro, for helping me with my slides and coming up with cute caricatures of me. Introductions. We'll go through our BA in the CoE session. We'll have some Q&A about BA in the CoE. And then talk some Salesforce BA news and opportunities. Not too much going on these days, but I've also been kind of floating away from LinkedIn for a little bit. So we've got what we got. And then some recording off badass BA chit chat. Folks on YouTube, it'll be why I encourage you to actually come to the sessions, because our last half an hour is usually I would say the most interesting, because we have really interesting stuff here, but certainly the most I would say the most emotional for me, where, you know, we really kind of get into how people are feeling about things, and celebrate with folks. And it's the stuff that I particularly enjoy beyond the learning. I am Vanessa Grant. This month, avoiding cert maintenance. I'll get to it eventually. Have to do it in the next, was it like 20 days? I am actually currently on a big project that I've been full-time on, doing Scrum Master work and business analysis work. They are probably looking for me right now, but I'm here with you today. And I've been doing Salesforce work. It's an interesting thing. It's been 16 years, but I realized as I was writing the number 16, because I was like, oh, it's a new year, I should update this. I was like, 16 sounds like too much. So now I'm going with 15 plus. I feel like that probably, you know, sounds a little better. I am a certified Scrum Master and a credential ambassador. And my new email. For folks that don't know, all the Trailblazer community group leaders have had to update their email addresses. So if folks want to reach me in the group, I am now vanessa.sfba@gmail.com. Hey, over to you.
Yeah, two things. Why your previous email was much funner looking.
It was my work one, and that's a Gmail one, but for whatever reason, their whole little email migration would not work with my work email. So
Okay.
it is more fun, but I'm trying to, like, you know, have a dedicated one for community stuff.
I like that. Okay, maybe it's something I should do as well. Thank you also for making me feel really old, because I put there 30 years, right? 16 years Microsoft space, 14 in the Salesforce space. In project delivery, you can see that I've written 3 books, which my husband tells me I don't market enough. So please, somebody buy one at least, so I can tell him I sold enough to, you know, to pay for my coffee. Yeah, so I've done quite a bit, but maybe not as much as our guest Penny. I think I saw you pop up.
Hi, I'm here. Hopefully you can see me. I can see me. So
Yay! Welcome, Penny. Well, Penny, I figure you have an intro slide in your deck, but I've made one for you as well because I wanted to showcase also Pei's lovely drawings. I think Pei is great at expressing emotion in her stick figures, and Penny is amazing, and we are so excited. Penny, do you want to say hi to the crowd, and you can do an overview or introduce yourself more later, whatever works for you.
Yeah, that's great. If you've got time, just tell me when to shut up, Vanessa. Because I also don't have very many slides, which is completely my bad for not having enough time / organization to get myself ready. So I've only got a couple of slides, one of which is some stats. So I figured I'd put those up because there's also the links in there that you can follow to see the info. So yeah, I did my certification re-up lately, Vanessa, and honestly, it's one of the easiest ones. I mean, they're never that bad, are they? Let's be honest. And this one, like, I did the questions without even reading the content, and then the hands-on one that you have to do is really not that bad. So don't put it off. Get on and do it. So yeah, I've been about 20 years doing Salesforce stuff. I also am a Scrum Master and have got Prince 2, so I kind of feel some of your pain from the BA world. And my main job is kind of like practice leader, I suppose you'd describe me as. So one foot in the go-to-market commercial side of how we think about Salesforce business, and the other foot in the how do we make sure we can actually deliver any of these suckers kind of side of the business. And probably I always feel like I'm failing at both. But anyway, that's me. And I'm currently at VML, which is part of WPP, a big marketing agency, which is kind of cool because it's very entrepreneurial, but also part of a big organization. Kind of nuts because we have like a great company over here that's brilliant at Salesforce, and then complete desert over here. So it's very, very variable. So yeah, that's me.
Well, welcome, Penny. We're super thrilled to have you. I think it's a great topic. Um, I'm sure Pei has had some experiences with COEs. I've certainly participated in them myself, and I actually had never even heard of them until Ian Gotts, who's one of my people that really got me into business analysis. I didn't really understand business analysis until I think Ian Gotts was one of the people who really was one of my gateway influencers, I guess. Had a whole series on centers of excellence, which was also fantastic. So great topic. Super excited to bring it. And so let's get it brought. I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and Penny, I'll let you pull up your slides and we
Okay,
can get chatting.
okay. Now, where's the button for me to share screen? Here we go. Right, so like I said, where is it? Yeah, it's giving me quality, but not the ability to actually do it. Here we go. I've only got a couple of slides, so please forgive me. I'm more of a chatterer anyway. Here we go. And I know Vanessa said, like, wait and ask questions at the end. Now I'm sharing, I actually can't see anybody, which is the weirdest thing. So please do feel free to shout out because I'm much more of a conversational kind of a person. But if you want to put questions in the Q&A for afterwards, then that's fine too. So forgive me for not having done a full deck, but it has been a kind of a busy time. So like for me, I'm based in London. I work full time. I'm also a kinship carer, meaning that I'm raising my 3-year-old granddaughter by myself. And then also my dog has been very ill. He's 15. I think that's about 105 in dog years. So all in all, like my life has just imploded. And so you can feel for me. Like before 8 on Saturday morning, I think she'd poured orange juice everywhere and a melted lollipop, and he'd weed in her pop-up tent. And that was just before 8. So forgive me for not being as organized as I might otherwise have been. But first of all, I love the idea of you as badass BAs, because I have long felt that being a BA is a triumph of hope over experience. And so I really I'm grateful to you all for continuing to fight the good fight. And I do appreciate you for doing it, because in my experience on projects from all perspectives, I think that BAs are often the people who can look at a project with the most honest eyes and see the challenges and see the people on a project in the truest light, but very often without actually having the power or the influence to shape that or change things for the good. So, and I'm going to be like really honest, so please pipe up and tell me that I'm wrong or whatever, but most of my project experience has been on Salesforce projects. And if I'm honest, I think it's rare to the point of exceptional in my experience for a Salesforce project to come to an end. I think often they don't have an end, like it's quite difficult to know when the end is, but when they come to an end, for them to have realized everything that was the vision right at the beginning. And I think there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, and it definitely is not a criticism of the project. I think that if you look at anything else in the world, whether that's a TV show about people like remodeling their houses, or when you go on a diet and you think, oh, I'll be happy when I've lost this weight or whatever, it like life is not like that, and Salesforce is not like that either. You know, the projects, the hopes, the investment we put in them, of the expectations are really, really difficult to realize. And a lot of times with Salesforce projects, they run maybe a little late, they run over budget, and the transformation is actually quite difficult to analyze, let alone kind of value against the original vision that you had. And often I think that's because of a bit of a lack of leadership to start with, maybe a bit of a lack of investment, so you end up compromising, and then sometimes a lack of a real desire to change from all of the participants in that project, which is why I think, in my experience, the best projects I've ever done have been in very small organizations, like 20 people organizations, where somebody can have that complete vision and drive it through. And it's easier for everybody to coalesce around that, and you can deliver on it. And I think that BAs often end up being kind of the jam in the sandwich, with everybody else squashing them, between like the original problem that needs to be solved, the vision that started initially, what the technology can actually do, what the team that you're working with are capable of building, the time and the budget available, what the stakeholders will say they want, what the stakeholders all really want, like all of those things kind of just go into the melting pot. And what you end up getting at the end is some kind of compromise, almost like a drunken stagger to what you end up with, rather than the kind of the sort of beautiful utopia that you maybe wanted right at the beginning. But I think, like I said, my home remodeling or diet examples, I think it's the true same thing there. And one of the things I wanted to share is that one of the things I think is really interesting is that while talking about projects in that way is still, I feel quite bad like talking about projects in that way. It's like very much the thing you're not supposed to talk about. You know, you're supposed to say, hey, if we do everything right, if we follow the process correctly, then we get this perfect outcome. And I'm not sure that I really believe in that anymore. And I think that the story around AI projects, it's not about AI projects. Like, in my opinion, these stats that have come out about like the proof of concept not making it to production, this kind of AI valley of death, as they call it, I think is indicative of projects as a whole. So I wanted to share these stats with you here. So these are kind of three key examples, and you've got all the references here. So 87% of data science projects never making it to production. The Gartner prediction of that 80% of AI projects will fail. And then you've got this kind of gap between proof of concept and go live. So with only 10 to 30% of proof of concepts actually going into production. And while all of these stats come from AI projects, I feel like there are some universal truths that we're learning from them. And so for me, that is then a bit of a kind of segue into the Salesforce Centre of Excellence. So Vanessa, you were saying that COEs were kind of fairly new to you. I'd say I've been working with COEs and actually under that name for maybe 8 years. And the first two that I worked with were with really huge consumer brands. So about 8 years ago. And in both cases, the Centre of Excellence was created to solve a problem. And I think that that is still a pretty common reason for creating a COE. And in one of those cases, it was a company that had many, many Salesforce orgs, where there was a lot of competition between the orgs. And I don't know if this has been familiar to any of you guys working with clients, where a business unit or a team or even an individual can get quite territorial about their Salesforce org. And what that means is that when somebody else wants to use Salesforce but doesn't quite agree with that build, they go create their own Salesforce org, right? And then you end up with companies that have got many, many Salesforce orgs. And this particular company wanted to bring them all together under a Centre of Excellence to try and drive consistency. And the other company, go for it.
I was since you're open to us just bringing stuff up, and so everybody disregard what I said. Feel free to keep this conversational. So yes, I think with the multiple Salesforce orgs, I've certainly recommended COEs to clients that I've had, but my personal experience with COE was more actually not Salesforce orgs competing with each other, but competing with another product team within the organization. Because sometimes the internal product team would be like, oh, we could solve this business problem, and all of a sudden build something that was out of the box in Salesforce. And so we ended up having to create a COE almost to figure out how to how to manage internal business problems and figure out what was the best way to move forward. So if it's this type of problem, it goes to the product team. If it goes to that type of problem, it's the Salesforce team. And working together as a team, where that right hand and left hand, I think generally is where that COE comes in. Is the how do we align as an organization to do what's in the best interest of governing the technology that we have.
Yeah, and there are so many of those kind of problems that drive the COE. And kind of one of the challenges with creating a COE like that is often it's like shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted. Like, it's often after a problem has arisen that the COE gets set up. So sometimes it can be that there's complexity in there, or there is a leader that wants something different. Sometimes it can be like a land grab. And so sometimes there is a tension where maybe the budget holder for the initial project is somebody like closer to the business. It's a business unit that is funding the initial project. And then once you get to go live, very often the long-term governance hasn't really been considered. And so then Salesforce needs to land somewhere. Often that's going to be within the technology team. But who and how to manage that are all questions that need to get resolved. And so Centre of Excellence is often a really good solution to doing that. It also can be created for incredibly positive reasons, which is usually where there's enthusiasm about developing Salesforce, taking it forward, having a roadmap, wanting to build a plan for what the future looks like. And that's a kind of much healthier start for thinking about the future. But oftentimes, I think that movement from the business into IT, that there can be quite a bit that's left behind when that happens, which is around what people are used to, how they're used to running product, who's doing the work, how it's being funded. And in my experience, business analysis is often a bit of a casualty in that move. But I'd be interested in what all of you guys think about that. So like for me, I would say that in my experience of Centre of Excellence, is often an IT leader that's running it, and there is not business analysis of tickets that come in. So it's very much shifts towards more of a managing tickets mindset, where tickets are coming in for changes to Salesforce, and the business analysis that is requested in that is all around delivery. So like, how do we prioritize? How does this get built? How do we manage our release cycle? How do we test? How can we fall back? And very often, those tickets that come in are designed in the form of a solution. So like, I request a new field, I request a new object, I request a new process. And the Centre of Excellence often is not like governing that in the way that I would hope for. That usually those are just managed at a ticket level, and over time that will change the nature of your Salesforce org, like drip by drip by drip. And I think one of our ways to solve that problem is to elevate business analysis back up, so that there is a much more aggressive gatekeeper between tickets and the backlog. That would be like what I would be advocating for, but I don't know if that fits with what you've all experienced.
On, do you want to go?
Yeah, I was going to comment that the concept of CoE, I've seen it in a cross-functional matrix thing. So an organization, a large organization, speaking about large organizations, where this could be suited is there is a BA CoE, right? So we focus on at platform agnostic, right? The requirements are agnostic as to how it's being enabled. It's all about being a badass BA, the requirement solicitation, process documentation, building out the templates, making sure it meets a specific set of standards, etc. Then there's the Salesforce CoE, or the platform or product or whatever CoE, and I think the combination of those two can be very, very powerful. Specifically to address like the Salesforce CoE, the having an established like architecture review and design authority kind of aspect of that CoE can help kind of address some of the things that you were talking about where people are fighting. It's like, well, take it to the CoE. They're the ones with the design authority. They will tell you which directions to take because they will take ownership of those decisions. So I think that is how I've seen it at other organizations, and we're trying to establish it here at Stellantis, which is where I'm at, Stellantis Financial Services. Sorry, I'm going to be more specific. I don't work for the automotive space. I work for the captive financing arm of it in the US. But that's what we're trying to establish, because a lot of people are just doing the kind of their own thing. And so establishing those standards and patterns that can harden and kind of get to see the history of why things are the way they are, whether that's business processes, requirement solicitations, or how we enable it in a given platform like Salesforce, really, really is pretty cool to kind of see that kind of come to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like the dream, really, to have that BA CoE at the beginning, because managing demand is so critical to what happens later. Because what I find often happens, even in a CoE that's like got the technical design authority happening, is the challenge I've seen there is that there's no like memory. There's no memory of the business rationale. Right? So what you have is all technical memory of what we've got built and technical documentation, but there's no business memory of why did we do it that way? What is the rationale for that? Like, that is all kind of assumed, or it's somebody else's problem somewhere further down the food chain, which is why having that BA team is so key. Because what I've seen happen in quite a lot of CoEs is that maybe a year ago, something got built in code because as a kind of a workaround or a quick solution, it was quicker to do it that way. But now that original piece of functionality has been iterated on, changed. And so now when a ticket comes into the design authority, you're ending up like building on top of something that if you went back to the beginning now, you wouldn't build it that way. But you're kind of stuck with it because of a decision that got made a year ago. And I think that's where having that BA authority to impact that before it happens is really, really important, because what I've seen happen in a number of centers of excellence as well is there becomes almost like an assumption that this is how Salesforce is, right? And when it isn't, and that's because what you often find is kind of you went live with this version of Salesforce that was as good as it was going to get for that day. Like that day it was right, and immediately that it goes live, everything starts to change. Your leadership changes, people come and go, the products that you sell, how you price them, how you do your sales process and your marketing, that changes. And when that just comes through as tickets, then you're just adjusting Salesforce rather than reconsidering things. So I think having that BA group, particularly if they can be managing demand that comes in through tickets, as well as managing strategy from the business, to kind of gatekeep access to the CoE is a brilliant, brilliant idea, and something that's all too often missing, unfortunately, in my experience.
Elena, do you want to?
Sure, I'll jump in. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
And sorry, my sound cut off, so I'm not sure if what I'm gonna say, maybe you've spent covering already. So I'm a senior BA and I've been a BA for about 7 years. And I recently just completed a product owner certification through scrum.org. And I think just what you're saying, Penny, here, that kind of just connects everything for me, because I think one of the things that you mentioned, right, is just, and people are saying it in the chat, like a lack of like a product vision, right, a product goal, where you're essentially, because Salesforce is so, flexible, and it can be perceived as, this kind of low code platform, well, we can change things on the go. I think that also contributes to that kind of lack of like, well, why do we need to analyze the need to add a new object? We could just add it right now, right? And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on either like product ownership, like if you've, or maybe the way, maybe you'll address this later, but like, what is the right way to do this? Because I'm like, everything you're calling out, I've seen, and I'm just wondering like, what is the solution, right? How do we actually make it work? So thank you so much.
Oh no, that's great. Because I can't see the chat or anybody's faces at the moment, so it's good to get that feedback. Thank you. Yeah, I agree with you totally. And what I try and say to customers right at the beginning of the engagement is that the fact that kind of any idiot can configure Salesforce, and I include myself, I am the idiot, right? I do not come from a technical background. I've got no technical skills, and I can configure Salesforce. Like the fact that anybody can do it is its biggest strength. Because it stops barrier to entry, makes things happen quickly, all of that good stuff. And also its biggest weakness, because it means that you can end up in an absolute mess really quickly. And another company where I worked with their Centre of Excellence, just to give you an idea of the scale of their problems, is they had maxed out the number of fields allowed on the account object. Just to give you that vision of, imagine being a big company where that was a big problem to try and manage. They were screwed, and that was because they were using one org for many different business units, where instead of dealing with like, well, I call this like tomato and you call it tomato, instead of like figuring out, look, let's just call it one and I'll just compromise and say tomato, no, we'll have 2 fields then, right? And if you imagine that kind of level of issue across a large organization for everything there could possibly be a field for, then you get to the scale of where their problems were. And that is not like about different language or different product lines or anything like that. That is just about nobody in leadership being able to control that. And I think that your point about product ownership is a really strong one. One of our challenges, I think, and I say ours as in the ecosystem, is that product owners tend to be very often pigeonholed into the IT space. And I've also worked in scenarios where like the product owner can be really derogatory about their users. And it can quite quickly happen that there is a huge gulf between the end user community who are experiencing the product and who maybe are not the easiest people to work with and maybe will not change or be flexible. And then sometimes a product owner whose responsibility is into IT and primarily comes from an IT background and is used to working with people who are much more pragmatic about their own practice and their own personal ways of working. And you can see these big kind of gaps arise. And I think actually the elevation of whether it's product owner, whatever you call it, like product owner, solution architect, business analysis, I think those three things are a strong, like the crossover that we can use. They should be leading the CoE conversation. And all too often they're too far down the chain of delivery. So that's what I liked about that other example where you've got that separate BA Centre of Excellence that has got some power to it, because all too often the product owner is responsible just for managing output and the BA is just responsible for managing the how, and neither of them are empowered to influence the what are we doing and why are we doing it and how did we end up here. And you know, design authority can get quite like ivory tower architect people, again not related back to the business.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And I think all of that, like for me, that's what stood out to me about these figures that we're now beginning to see about AI, because to me, I was like, these are problems that I know, right? These are the issues. This is why you end up with a customer that's maybe re-platforming. And sometimes you have a customer that's re-platforming never ends, right? I don't know if any of you have experienced that. I wish I could see you and do a hands up, but I've got maybe 5 customers I can think of who got to the point where they decided they were going to do a re-platforming, and then all that happened was they ended up with another Salesforce platform in the mix as well as the other ones, because of the kinds of challenges that we're talking about here that make it really difficult to do that ongoing management. So for me, I think the privileging at the top of that CoE of what I would consider business analysis skills, which is the insight around challenging the decision makers about balancing leadership and end user demands, is so important. Because I've also worked in a CoE where I felt it was almost seasonal, that you could see at one point the tickets would be primarily from end users and you'd see a lot of processes cut, you'd see fields cut, you'd see validation rules cut, and then the season would shift towards leadership who wanted all of that detail, and so then those would all go back in again. And it just was a constant kind of ebb and flow rather than a proper mature conversation happening. I think the other gap that we've got is around how that business process is documented and managed. So one of the things that I try with varying degrees of success to do is to say that the Centre of Excellence is not for managing Salesforce, it's for managing X, Y, and Z business processes. And so to the lady earlier who talked about that BA CoE that was totally product agnostic, I think that is one of the answers to say, like, this is about our sales process or our contact center service process, not about the product. That I think is key, and is also, I suspect, a big reason here why the AI is failing too. I think maybe we're the canary in the coal mine for AI. So, sorry.
It's okay. Hi, Penny. It's Faye. I don't know why you can't see. Can you see me? Or
I can't. No.
I can't see anyone at all. How strange.
So we
Yeah.
can, okay, it's because she's presenting, so she loses the visibility of the different videos. So she doesn't see hands up or any of that. So the facilitators would have to speak up and highlight that for her, because she's sharing her screen and it takes over literally the whole thing.
I didn't realize that. Thank you for that, Anne. I've never been a non-facilitator presenting. Yeah. Hi, Penny. Nice to see you again after a long time. I have a question. So I've never worked with a large enterprise COE, and Anne, thank you so much for your input there. This is what I'm wondering is around structure. So in an organization where you might have, different system, enterprise platform, where you have Salesforce, you might have, an ERP, you might have NetSuite, some other lots and lots of other systems. So in your experience, how do you see kind of like a COE structure to be? Would you, so would you see sort of like system agnostic BAs cutting across all technical platforms, or do you, in terms of a more optimal kind of organization, would there be little pockets of, you would have a Salesforce little mini COE, and then you might have a Microsoft like SharePoint BizTalk mini COE over there, and then you might have NetSuite one. I assume they might have one, or would you have a more centralized tech agnostic business analyst, because the skills that could potentially cut across everything else, because you're articulating what the end user wants in terms of benefit, as opposed to what the system needs to do. So just curious as to your experience with your clients, what has been the most optimal structure for COE in enterprise organizations?
So I would say I have not had the advantage of working in one that is like super optimal. I think if it was me, like if I was C-suite of one of these big enterprise companies, what I would want to have is a center of excellence for like my lead to cash process or my service process, right? And have a center of excellence that is around, what are the business processes that we do here? What are the tools and technologies that support those business processes? And then a kind of smaller element of, what does that mean for the people, right? And actually, what we end up doing in a lot of our big organizations is just assume that leadership hierarchy will cover that. But it rarely does, because like one person doesn't have all of those skills. In the center of excellence, you would have the group of people like you have on a project, who are each bringing different knowledge, different skills, different input into that conversation. So if I was C-suite, that's what I would try and do, is to manage like lead to cash. And I would then be looking at that process and thinking about the tools as a secondary thing, how they can support me in delivering that process. The reason that is kind of a little bit utopian, though, is also about budget. So I've seen primarily two ways of doing center of excellence, and the truth is, the logic behind them is around money. So one would be the general pulling similar systems together budget. So it might be that everything that's considered a digital product, so not just Salesforce, but other cloud technologies or other front office technologies, for example, might be grouped together in one center of excellence. That, I would say, has been the weakest example that I've worked in, because that is led by IT, but obviously you've got really different systems in that group that have very little in common, either in the way that they work, in the skills that you need to work on them, on what they're doing for the business. But that is quite common. And I get the logic there, because if you're creating an IT department, you would have a structure of people hired to look after those systems, right? So you make the Centre of Excellence that kind of fits that model. The more common one, and it's by far the more common, probably 70% of I've maybe worked across 30 Centre of Excellences, I'd say now. And the more common one is that it's at the Salesforce level. So it is like an attempt at pulling together the global threads of Salesforce. And for these big enterprises, you know, they might have 400 Salesforce orgs, they might have more than that. And so the idea of the CoE is to pull those together into one management structure that is looking after both their contract with Salesforce in terms of maintaining the costs, managing some control around users, and spend on development. And often that would be a multi-partner environment as well, where you've got different partners doing different things in different business units, different types of work. So there is a lot to manage in those kind of environments. And what I find is that those CoEs manage a lot of those practical things really, really well, like the licenses, like the partners, like the security. But then where they end up having a lot weaker of a showing up is around actually the job that the technology is supposed to actually do, which is really sad when you think about it, in my opinion. So hopefully that kind of answers. I would go from the business process out rather than the technology in, but I completely understand why they go technology in.
Thanks for that, Penny. That was really helpful.
If you are done with your slides, Penny, I don't know if you want to stop sharing so you can see some of the party chat that's happening. I think there are some fun things for you to pick up and respond to.
Oh, okay, cool. Yes.
And this way, Pay or Srividya, that she'll be able to see who's raising their hands and respond to them. And if I butcher your name, I'm so sorry.
Yes, you were right.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Yeah, let me jump to the Q&A. Oh, it's all in the chat. Sorry.
Yeah, we're good BAs. We don't follow instructions well. Sorry, Vanessa. But while she's catching up on chat, do you have something you wanted to add, Srividya?
Yeah, I think I wanted to add a little bit on the last point that Penny was making. There was one enterprise customer that I've worked with who again followed the IT model of CoE, which means that you have head of IT who is managing several channels within their business, and Salesforce is one arm. But what ended up having is when we look at the longer roadmap for the year, right, from a business, then the requirements from the Salesforce side kept pushing away, because the business users bring, the Salesforce product owner had a BA within them, so which means they were doing very well in terms of writing the user stories, taking the requirement and making sure it's implemented. But sales team were doing their refinement sessions with the Salesforce team, and the top level roadmap, when you look at it, the IT did not prioritize the Salesforce requirement as much. Maybe they had other things going on. So I think it is, like you said, mostly used in the way that you suggested, but the drawback is that the Salesforce does not get priority, one of the drawbacks. But if it was getting pushed from the business user or a head from the sales head directly into saying, this is what I want for my roadmap, I think it would be different, right?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack within that, but wait, there's a slide that I often do when I'm working with customers quite early in the engagement, where I show like where this ends if you don't manage it properly, which is what I call the I hate Salesforce gap. So you end up with the build going one way and the business going another way, and that bit in the middle from like when you went live and everybody accepted it, as those things diverge, your I hate Salesforce gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's when you start to get that feedback in the business, and it's like bad workman blames his tools. You know, it starts to be like Salesforce is the problem. It's not. It's like we're all the problem. And I think it was Anne on here, sorry if I didn't say your name right, who said perhaps we should define what a good CoE would look like. Yes. And so whenever I start a new project, like that's one of the things that I try and talk about right at the beginning, is what do we do afterwards? Like it's a really difficult, it's a bit like having the conversation when you just get engaged about what you're going to do if you ever get divorced, you know? And it's like nobody's wanting to have that conversation because it's all hearts and flowers and it's all wonderful. But you've got to think about like that long term, what happens after wedding day, you know? We're not just how we are today is not how we're going to be for forever. And it's about managing that. And I think for me, when I'm starting on a project, how that conversation goes is a really good barometer of how mature the organization is, because when that goes down like a lead balloon is when I know that probably they're not doing the project for the right reasons. You know, when they've got the maturity to really engage in that conversation and to be thinking ahead like that, you know, actually they're not going to need so much help. But when nobody wants to talk about that, no one wants to take responsibility for it, those are kind of all the red flags about the project itself as well. The bigger challenge is when you actually come into an existing CoE, because then you have all of those challenges that we have when we walk into a project of people being quite personally attached to things. And that again is where I feel like the BA needs to be privileged. And so I would say as BAs, you need to look for who in that group is it the product owner? Is it actually the technical architect? Who is the person who is going to see that through your eyes and help elevate that role? Because all too often, exactly to your point, the BA is expected to be the person who is doing the daily stand-ups, who is writing up the user stories, who is instructing the developers on building the stuff, and that is no satisfaction for most BAs, and it's not actually doing the best from the CoE. So I would say where there's an existing one, you want to hunt out who can be the stakeholder in that group, who can advocate to elevate the conversation, because that's generally what's necessary in there. But it's a very difficult thing to achieve.
I have a different take on this. I would not look to the BAs. For me, your problem is a project problem with resources, right? When you bust out your triangle, you have three things. You have quality, you have resources, and then what's the third corner of the triangle? I'm looking to pay. But for me, it's you can't have the squeakiest wheel to get all the attention, right? You need to have empowerment as an organization to say, hey, does this project, was it approved? Is there funding? Are there other things that need to stop in order to now address this squeaky wheel that comes out of nowhere? So for me, it's not a BA thing, it's an organizational thing about prioritization and what should and should not get attention. And so again, maybe it's because I work at larger organizations, and at smaller organizations, the BA is addressing that and trying to facilitate and satiate the different stakeholders. But in a larger organization, I would say it's a more of a PMO function to say, hey, this is a net new project. It needs to go through intake, it needs to be evaluated, and it needs to have proper governance in order for that work to move forward. You can't just say, surprise, I'm going to push this in, and then everybody's supposed to go in lockstep and go and achieve that request. It needs to go through the proper channels, proper governance to get evaluated. Is it appropriate? And then if necessary, we either need to get additional resources or we have to stop some stuff to then get this done appropriately. Because like for me, I was working in a group that had quote unquote RevOps, but sales literally sucked all the life out of every project. We never did anything for servicing. We didn't do anything for marketing. And guess what? Servicing was actually what closed the deals because we're the ones that onboarded the people. And because we never got attention, people bitched and moaned that nothing was getting done because onboarding took forever. So I would say it's a PMO function and and making sure that you have the appropriate resources scheduled out to handle the different things. You can't just address the person that's quote unquote banging on the chest the loudest. If the governance say, hey, it's the CEO, it's Mark Benioff, go and do it. Okay, it's a little bit different there, but someone somewhere needs to be able to say, okay, let's pause. Do we accept this? Can we absorb this? Yes or no?
Yeah.
If we can't, something needs to stop, or we need to acquire additional resources to address the ask.
Yeah, and I would say even having a rubric on how we are gauging how important a thing is to put into the roadmap is important in that regard as well. So that you know it isn't just like whoever's the loudest in the room. It's like, okay, well let's look at the ROI on it. Let's look at the time on it. Let's look at the cost. Let's look at the value, the risks associated with not doing it. All those are important.
Yeah, there's managing the demand of what goes into the CoE is really important. But I think there's a question almost beyond that, like above that demand. So I see CoEs can solve those problems reasonably well. So I worked with a CoE once that was one org for many business units. And when I arrived, they had a problem that was very much along those lines, where only the biggest countries, it was almost like they got the most number of votes. So if a big market like the UK put in a ticket, then that would always go through. When a small market like Finland put in a ticket, they would never get through, even though their idea might be really valuable for everybody. And so we reworked how we managed demand so that there was more like people could upvote, downvote. It became more of a community way to manage demand for what went through. But then it's like the sphere that the demand sits in, right? So the demand that you're getting from users can directly conflict with then what gets dumped on the CoE top down from the business. Like, we're going to do this new type of product, or we're launching this new business, or we're acquiring these guys, so now you have to do this. But I think also PMO is a really good point that is often lost in CoEs, because folks are just expected to absorb the work. Like I've often found a real lack of like a rule book or a rubric, like you said, about how to know, is something a ticket or is something a project? And sometimes things will get grouped together as a theme for a period. So it might be like, our roadmap for the next 3 months is going to cover these 2 or 3 themes, but that is very like just a personal opinion. Like, it's just a convenient thing of these things we're choosing to fit them together. There's like nobody from outside of the CoE has kind of defined that set of values. So when I mentioned earlier that sometimes you see like a product owner who can be quite disparaging of their end users, you end up almost with Salesforce becoming their Salesforce. Like, they build what they think is important in the way that they think it should be done, and that the more that happens, the more distant they actually get from the end users, which again I think is a reason for having the conversation about this like really early.
So I know we are getting close to time. I guess, Penny, do you have any last things that you want to? Of course, we're happy to keep the conversation going on the unrecorded line, but for our recorded audience, Any last thoughts on BAs in the CoE?
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to carry on reading through the chat because it's really, really interesting, the kind of debates that are going on there. And those are debates that I've seen myself in customers. I think the main takeaway, I think, is that for all of us as BAs, elevating that role is absolutely crucial. Like, BAs are really vital to our projects, to the ongoing management of these systems. And it's really easy for leaders sometimes to try and push that BA role down, because then that prevents challenging questions and kind of debate about things, and to make the BA role like very functional, very delivery orientated. But that's not the right thing to do for the end users or the build or for us. And I think that that's also where we're at risk, right, of AI being able to do that in our place. So I think as BAs, having this conversation early in projects, early in going into clients, about what does the long term look like and how does that get managed and how do we build the roles in it, is really, really important. And I think that would be the main takeaway. And definitely don't assume it's there, right? So if you're presented with a CoE to work with, they are all slightly different. And so I would ask the questions and attempt to carve out that role, because we might go in there, particularly this group is obviously really highly qualified in the space, and you go in there with assumptions around product owner, for example. But I've worked with some incredibly like amateur product owners who don't have the experience or the qualifications, and who maybe aren't there for the right reasons. So I think that is vital. And I would say that a BA should kind of be the right hand person towards the top of the CoE for managing how the CoE itself performs, like almost keeping that real.
I will add this. It's okay if you don't have a CoE, but the outcomes and the deliverables and the methodologies that a CoE delivers, that's what you should be empowered to establish, right? Some organizations may not feel comfortable with giving you that authority or whatever, right? But you still want to strive to have those outcomes that Penny has highlighted as a standalone one-man army or one-lady army, BA, if need be, if you can't establish that in a formal capacity, right? So that's why I said things about creating templates, methodologies that will allow you to be consistent, and then you can make adjustments accordingly when interacting with various different stakeholders. So the CoE isn't the silver bullet. It's the outcomes you're trying to achieve with the CoE that you should strive for as a BA, and have that empowerment and influence to be able to protect yourself, but also the orgs that you get into.